Hello everyone, and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 50, April the 22nd, 2017, Saturday. Alrighty, kind of a cloudy, overcast day here. Kind of cool too, in the People's Republic of Ohio. Okay, well, what we got today is some pretty good information, mainly on what's coming up with the hearings. We now finally have some dates being posted on the House Intelligence Committee website, and it looks like the first few people we have coming up. And these are both, it looks like these people are going to be testifying pretty much on the same days with the House Intelligence and Senate Intelligence Committee hearings, because they're both looking into the Russia situation. They're really looking at two things, the Russia, three things really. Russia's involvement in the elections, the Russia and the Trump or people around Trump colluding, and of course what we've been talking about here on TowerGate is the surveillance of the Trump campaign and people around him, and all the other things that go along with that. So it looks like they're going to be kind of covering all those things. They're not going to break them up into separate hearings focusing on each of those individual things. They're just going to question people, across the entire spectrum of these three major issues. And it looks like that Comey and Rogers will be testifying in a closed hearing. Of course, James Comey, head of the FBI, Mike Rogers, head of the NSA, looks like they are going to be testifying in a closed hearing, and that will happen sometime after May the 2nd. Of course, Comey and Rogers were together this past week at a Spooks convention, so probably, Rogers, we know what Comey's all about. Rogers, I haven't quite figured him out yet. It appears that he was the individual who stood in the way of the first FISA warrant, but he wasn't very forthcoming in the previous hearings that we saw. We know that he went to Trump Towers when Trump was interviewing people for positions in his cabinet and things like that. We know that some people speculated that maybe Rogers went there to advise Trump that he was being surveilled on, or that there was people attempting to surveil him. And we know that right after he visited Trump at Trump Towers, that there were several members of the Intelligence Committee, including Clapper and Brennan, who tried to get him fired. So it's really hard to say exactly where these people all come down and what their individual interests are, what their collective interests are. We'll have to just wait and see how the hearings go. I have a pretty good idea how they're going to go, and I'll tell you what I think before I get off this video. So, Comey and Rogers will testify in a closed hearing, which means we won't get to see it or hear about it. And that's a shame, because I would love to see James Comey answering these questions in front of cameras. Obviously, it's going to be very embarrassing for him to try to explain why he used the dossier to secure a FISA warrant. Whether or not their closed committee is testifying in front of the entire committee, or whether it's just the heads of the committee, they don't really state who will actually be on the questioning side of that, but obviously it will be represented by at least one Democrat and one Republican, possibly all of them. We don't really know. Also invited to the House Intelligence Committee for an open testimony in front of the cameras will be John Brennan, James Clapper, Sally Yates. Of course, you remember Sally Yates was the acting attorney general who Trump fired because she would not go along with the travel ban. She obviously is a Trump hater, and you can expect Sally Yates to try to do everything she can to show that there was collusion between Trump, people around Trump, and the Russians. That's what Sally Yates will be doing. She's a hardcore lefty, and she'll be doing everything she can to work that side of the equation, as will Brennan and Clapper. But they will be testifying. Well, they've been invited at this point. We don't know if they've confirmed, but we have to assume that they will. I can't imagine them saying they wouldn't. I can't imagine hardly any of these characters just not showing up. I can see them showing up and pleading the fifth. I can see them showing up and dancing around and not answering questions and stating, well, that's classified, I can't talk about it. I can see a lot of that, but I can't see many of these people just not showing up. So anyway, Brennan, Clapper, and Sally Yates, open hearings in the House sometime after May 2nd. And of course, I think what we can expect in these hearings is obviously what you're going to see is most of these individuals who were part of the conspiracy to destroy the Trump candidacy, his presidency, and now working probably to cover up the evidence that would show that. Obviously, they're going to be trying to do damage to Trump and trying to show Russian collusion. Of course, the Democrats on the committee will be running that line of questioning, and that's what they'll be focusing on. What you're going to have with the Republicans on the committee are going to be probably, hopefully, holding these people's feet to the fire to try to find out exactly what evidence they had and what their reason was for having access to some of these materials, which really shouldn't have had anything to do with them, such as Sally Yates. I'm not sure what she would have been involved in. We're going to have to find out what they ask Clapper and Brennan regarding the sources of their intelligence. And I don't know if they've reviewed the FISA applications and the application for the FISAs, but that's obviously the information you would need to ask any questions of Brennan and Clapper that would help you determine whether or not the information they used should have even met the standard for a FISA request, and exactly where that information came from. So we'll have to find out when the hearings start. But as I said, I think what you're going to see is Democrats obviously running interference for the Obama administration officials. And remember, these people are involved. They're trying to save their own neck. So I expect getting any information out of them will be like pulling teeth. I expect that they'll stonewall, refuse to answer things, twist and spin. They'll do everything they can to cover themselves and the Obama administration. I don't think they can refuse to appear, though. I think they will have to appear. I just don't expect much will come out of them. In fact, in these hearings at all, as I've been saying throughout these videos I've been doing, that I don't think that the House or Senate Intelligence Committee, they'll run their dog and pony show. You'll have the partisanship on the left and on the right. The left trying to show the collusion, the right, the Republicans on the right, trying to show that there was surveillance conducted illegally or political motivations behind it. This is the two different tracks that the two different sides will take. It'll be a political dog and pony show. They'll probably, and of course, as we know from all these investigations, whether it's the IRS investigations, whether it was the Fast and Furious, whether it was the Clinton emails, whether it was the Clinton Foundation, regardless of what it is, what we tend to see is that they put on a nice show for us. They score some political points, but when it actually comes down to holding anybody accountable, they have each other's back. It's an inside game, and nothing will really come of it if it's left up to these two committees in Congress. That's just my personal opinion on the matter, based on history. And again, that's why I talk about and relate so much to the Watergate investigation. You know, during the Watergate investigation, that was nothing more than a dog and pony show for the Democrats to try to do damage, political damage to Republicans with what was going on there. And that Watergate investigation would have gone nowhere. The Republicans were playing defense. The Democrats were on offense. They were just trying to use it as a political dog and pony show for political reasons. They weren't probably ever seriously interested, even the Democrats, in holding anyone accountable for what went on in Watergate. The difference was with Watergate is that you had an insider, the Deep Throat character, Mark Felt, deputy director of the FBI, feeding information to Woodward. He knew all the crimes that went on, and so the Congress was not able to stop these facts from coming out because Woodward kept writing, and Bernstein kept writing the stories, dropping more information, forcing the Congress to do these things. The Congress, during the Watergate hearing, they weren't highly motivated to get to the bottom of anything or hold anyone accountable. They were forced to, because of the stories that were being written in the Washington Post with information that was coming largely directed from Deep Throat. So they were forced. The Congress was forced. And that's why it drug out for over 2 years. They never wanted to actually hold anybody accountable. So they were forced because of Deep Throat keeping Woodward and Bernstein on the right path. They continued to write stories and dig up more and more information. And then when they finally wrote the story where they wrote the story where they actually named the 5 men who controlled the funds at CREEP, the campaign to reelect the president, and they named those 5 people, and then they showed the evidence that the money that was that the burglars who broke into the Watergate, the money that they had on them came directly from the campaign to reelect. One of those 5 men, which we believe it was G. Gordon Liddy, released the funds to pay the burglars to break into the Watergate Hotel. And once that story hit the news press, and they were forced, the Congress was then forced to hold more hearings, and then these things started coming out, and there was no way they could stop it. The dam had broken, and there was nothing that they could do. And finally, even the Republicans were not able to play defense anymore, and the whole thing collapsed. So I expect that the exact same thing will happen here, and that the only way that we're going to see, and I know this frustrates a lot of you because I've read your comments, and I know it's frustrating to you, it's frustrating to me, but the only way that we're actually going to see people held accountable for conducting this illegal surveillance based on a political operation is if someone who is on the inside, who knows the story and has the information and has the sources, that they can leak to some journalist who will write the stories and keep writing the stories and keep it in the headlines, keep it in the press, and force the congressional committees to take this stuff up. But that's the only way it's going to happen. It's the only way it's going to happen, is they will have to be forced to actually try to get to the bottom of this, and that will only happen if journalists who are working this story continue to stay on it and keep the story in the news, and when they finally get some information, real hard evidence, some names of somebody or some physical hard evidence that forces the Congress to take these things up, only then will we possibly see justice being served in this case. And that's my feelings on it. In which case, as was the case in Watergate, when you actually produce some evidence like that, as in the case of Watergate, where they actually said, yeah, we now have the proof, the evidence that the money that paid the burglars came from the campaign to reelect. That is what really took the investigations pretty much out of the hands of the Congress, because now it was actually a crime and hard evidence of a crime. That's when the special prosecutor was appointed and the grand jury seated. And of course, as we know, Nixon fired the prosecutor Archibald Cox. It was called the Midnight Massacre, when he knew that these hearings were going to go on, and now it wasn't just a congressional thing with a dog and pony show. It was actually a prosecutor with the ability to prosecute and put people in jail, at which point that's when things got really serious. And at that point, it was when someone went to Nixon and said, well, this ain't really good, but you're the president. You can fire the prosecutor, which was political suicide, but he did it anyway. And that was what was called the Midnight Massacre, when Nixon fired the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox. So anyway, I think, like I said, I think this is the only way that we're actually going to see anything happen. As I've always said, it's only if it's going to go to a special prosecutor. As long as this thing is just playing itself out in the House and in the Senate with these committees, these people will cover each other's back. Yes, they love to make political points. Yes, they love the dog and pony show. Yes, they love the FaceTime. They like to look like they're tough people trying to get to it. This helps them in their re-elections, but it's all political theater is all it is. So like I said, I think that until some journalist comes up with some hard source inside who's got information, intel, hard evidence, or names or something that they can keep the story alive and force a special prosecutor to come forward with information that will actually reveal the crimes. And again, this is just going to be a dog and pony show. The Democrats will be muddying the water, playing obstruction, playing defense. The Republicans, at least on the House side, there's a couple good guys there, and I can expect they'll ask some tough questions. But, Comey and Rogers are going to be behind closed doors, closed hearings, so very little will actually come out of that. And we'll just have to see. Sessions, of course, has recused himself from anything, which is kind of crazy, because he would be the person who would take this to a special prosecutor. So, it's frustrating. I'm not saying I'm 100% sure that nothing will come out of this, but let's just say, based on the history and based on the way things are looking right now, I think these should be 3 separate, different sets of hearings. The fact that they're putting them all 3 together is just going to muddy up the whole situation, because, the Republicans are going to be asking questions about the surveillance, the Democrats will be asking questions about the collusion, and they'll all be asking questions because they all agree, because they all support the deep state, the military-industrial complex, and the globalist. So they all have this narrative that Russia is interfering in the elections. The anti-Russian propaganda campaign is much, much bigger than all of this, because that goes to U.S. interest in a region where the Russians are creating difficulties for us. And so that's an overriding narrative issue that they'll both work on. So it just muddies everything up. I think there should be separate hearings myself. I believe they should have specifically look into whether or not there was Russian collusion, one set of hearings, whether or not there was Russian interference in the election in general, another set of hearings, and another set of hearings on the surveillance on Trump. So I think that by putting all these together, it's just going to muddy things up, and I'm not optimistic that any truth will really come out of this, unless we get a whistleblower, someone on the inside that knows the whole story, has some hard evidence, some documented evidence, or is willing to come forward and testify. And as you can see, most of these sources want to remain anonymous. So maybe something will happen, it will break it wide open. I'm going to continue to follow this story. I know that many other people will continue to follow this story, and this is the only way that it's going to happen, is if we force it to happen. If we rely on the Congress critters, be they Republican or Democrat, they will do nothing more than put on a show for us, and nothing will come out of it. So I give you my word, I will continue to do these videos. I will continue to dig into this. There's other good journalists who are out there working on it as well, and we'll just take it day by day and follow it as it goes along. So thank you all for tuning in. It is April the 22nd, day 50, TowerGate. Thank you for subscribing, sharing the video. I appreciate your comments. Respond to as many of them as I can. And you all have a good weekend, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.